"Sir, you're under HOA arrest." I'm standing in my own driveway at 6:47 a.m., coffee still steaming, when two idiots in fake police uniforms march up with plastic zip ties. The smell of morning dew mixes with their cheap cologne as they announce I'm being detained for having an unauthorized vehicle. My FBI-issued Ford F-150, in my own driveway, on my own property. These morons have no idea I've spent 15 years taking down actual criminals, drug cartels, money launderers, white-collar fraudsters. And now two wannabe cops in polyester uniforms think they can arrest me with zip ties from Home Depot. These idiots have no idea what they just walked into. I slowly reach for my wallet, fingers brushing past my real federal badge, while they fumble with their plastic restraints like kids playing dress-up. What would you do if fake police tried arresting you in your own driveway? Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I bet your HOA's got some wild stories too. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up with fake cops in my driveway. My name's Marcus Donovan, and after 15 years hunting financial criminals for the FBI, I thought I'd found paradise. Willowbrook Estates. 847 homes of suburban bliss, reasonable neighbors, and an HOA that used to charge $45 a month for basic maintenance. Keywords, used to. I drive a modified Ford F-150, lifted, reinforced, tinted windows. Nothing crazy, just practical. When you're tracking money launderers through backwoods meth labs, you need a truck that won't get stuck in a ditch. The diesel engine rumbles like a contented bear, and after years of driving government sedans that scream, "Federal agent," I wanted something normal. For 3 months, life was perfect. The smell of fresh-cut grass, sprinkler systems hissing across lawns every morning, neighbors actually waving at each other. I thought I'd escaped the chaos of undercover work for good. Then the leadership changed, and Brenda Kensington slithered into power. Picture every HOA horror story you've ever heard, then give it bleached blonde hair and a god complex. Brenda's got the oversized sunglasses permanently grafted to her skull, carries a clipboard like it's Excalibur, and measures everything with the obsession of someone who clearly peaked in high school hall monitor duties. But here's where it gets interesting. Brenda doesn't just run the HOA, she runs Willowbrook Compliance Solutions, her own company that she hired to manage HOA enforcement. And guess who's married to Deputy Sheriff Rick Kensington? That's right, our girl Brenda just happens to be married to local law enforcement. The setup was so obvious, it was almost insulting to my intelligence. 3 weeks after she took office, I found a bright orange violation notice zip-tied to my mailbox. $300 for operating a commercial vehicle in residential zone. My truck, the same truck I'd been parking in the same spot for 3 months, was suddenly a problem. The violation cited vehicle height exceeding 72 inches. I grabbed my tape measure because apparently that's what my life had become, and found 6 identical trucks in the neighborhood. Same height, same modifications, same everything. Number of fines issued to those owners? 0. I called the HOA office. Brenda's voice could cut glass when she explained that those residents are compliant in other areas. What other areas? I asked. HOA board discretion supersedes written rules. Now I've interrogated cartel bosses who made more sense. I requested written clarification of these mysterious compliance standards. Her response came by certified mail, and I'm quoting directly. The board reserves the right to exercise discretionary enforcement based on community standards and resident cooperation. Translation: kiss the ring or pay the price. The metallic snap of her measuring tape became my personal alarm clock. She'd patrol at dawn, that clipboard pressed against her chest like armor, hunting for violations. The chemical assault of her perfume mixed with my truck's exhaust fumes whenever she cornered me for compliance discussions. But here's what really got my attention. I started noticing patterns. The houses getting fined all had something in common. Political yard signs she didn't like, vehicles that looked too working class, or residents who dared to question her authority. The rustling of her cheap polyester power suit became the sound of selective enforcement in action. The 14-day appeal window was a joke. Appeals only heard at monthly meetings held Wednesday afternoons at 2 p.m., because apparently everyone's unemployed or has the luxury of flexible schedules. Miss the meeting? Too bad. Pay up. That's when I realized this wasn't about compliance or community standards. This was about power, control, and a woman who'd figured out how to turn an HOA into her personal ATM machine. What Brenda didn't know was that she'd just picked a fight with someone who'd spent 15 years taking down people who thought they were untouchable. And I was about to give her a masterclass in what happens when you mess with the wrong federal agent. 2 weeks later, another orange notice. This time, $500 for intimidating conduct toward HOA officials. My crime? Asking for documentation at a public meeting. Apparently, in Brenda's little kingdom, requesting receipts qualifies as domestic terrorism. But our girl was just getting warmed up. She announced the creation of the Willowbrook Safety Patrol, neighbors in bright yellow vests carrying clipboards like they're running their own police state. The smell of fresh vinyl mixed with morning coffee as these discount mall cops began their community safety rounds, which somehow involved photographing everything I did. Walk to my mailbox? There's Janet from 3 houses down with her iPhone documenting my suspicious mail retrieval. Back out of my driveway? Bob emerges from across the street like a suburban paparazzi capturing my erratic vehicle movements. The constant clicking of smartphone cameras became my new morning alarm clock. Now I've been trained in surveillance and counter-surveillance by people who actually know what they're doing. These amateurs had all the subtlety of a high school marching band. But while they were playing spy games, I was doing what FBI agents do best, following the money. Public record searches are like Christmas morning when you know what you're looking for. Turns out Brenda's Willowbrook Compliance Solutions was billing our HOA $2,400 monthly for compliance services. Meanwhile, hubby Rick was pulling in another $800 for security consulting. For context, our old management company charged $400 total. Brenda had somehow increased costs by 700% overnight. But here's the beautiful part. Neither contract went through competitive bidding. No other companies considered. No emergency justification documented. Brenda literally hired herself and called it legal. I printed everything, financial records, state statutes, competitive bidding requirements, and walked into the next HOA meeting like a prosecutor approaching the bench. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stacked my evidence binders on the table with deliberate precision. "I'd like an explanation for these no-bid contracts," I announced, sliding the financial records across to Brenda. Her nervous finger-tapping sounded like a telegraph operator having a breakdown. "Emergency service provisions justify sole-source contracts." "What emergency?" I asked. "Mrs. Patterson's cat in a tree?" The room tittered. Brenda's face flushed red above those ridiculous sunglasses. That's when I dropped the hammer. State law requires competitive bidding for any HOA contract over $1,000 unless there's documented emergency justification. I placed a highlighted copy of the statute directly in front of her. "I don't see any documentation here, do you?" The silence was deafening except for folding chairs squeaking as residents leaned forward. Brenda's clipboard trembled in her hands. "The board operates within its legal authority," she stammered. "Then providing documentation should be easy," I replied with a smile that would make a shark proud. After the meeting, 3 residents approached me like we were forming an underground resistance. Sarah from Maple Street, fined for excessive holiday decorations. 3 pumpkins. Dave from Oak Avenue, cited for inappropriate landscaping, native wildflowers. Mrs. Chen, violated for loitering, walking her dog at normal speed. All of us had one thing in common. We'd questioned Brenda's decisions. But Brenda wasn't done playing games. 3 days later, I discovered she'd filed preliminary lien paperwork against my house, not for the original truck fine, for the new intimidation charge I hadn't even had time to appeal. That's when I realized this wasn't just about power trips or petty revenge. This was systematic. This was a shakedown operation dressed up as community management. The musty smell of the community center became familiar as our little group started meeting regularly. Sarah brought cookies that tasted like rebellion. Dave shared his research. Brenda's previous HOA position had ended with her leaving town one step ahead of a lawsuit. Mrs. Chen, bless her detailed note-taking soul, had documented every safety patrol interaction. The pattern was clear. They were targeting residents based on demographics and political affiliations, not actual violations. That night, sitting in my kitchen with fresh coffee and stacks of evidence, I felt that familiar FBI satisfaction when a case starts clicking together. Brenda thought she was playing chess against some suburban amateur. She had no idea she was actually playing checkers against someone who dismantled criminal enterprises for a living. Her first mistake was thinking I'd roll over and pay up like everyone else. Her second mistake was about to become very, very expensive. Brenda's response to public humiliation? Go full dictator. She announced the formation of the Willowbrook Enforcement Division, not Safety Patrol, enforcement. 2 unemployed nephews, Tyler and Brad, suddenly appeared in uniforms designed to fool people at a distance. Dark blue shirts, badge-shaped patches, utility belts with handcuffs. The smell of fresh polyester mixed with delusions of grandeur as these mall cops began patrolling our neighborhood. They drove a white Ford Explorer with magnetic decals screaming HOA enforcement in letters visible from orbit. The crunch of gravel under their boots became the soundtrack of suburban tyranny as they strutted around with all the authority of shopping mall security guards. But while they were playing dress-up, I was doing real detective work. FBI database access revealed Brenda's greatest hits collection. Previous HOA position in Arizona ended with a class action lawsuit for financial mismanagement. She'd skipped town before depositions began. Real estate license? Suspended twice for lying to clients about property values. Rick's record was even better. 3 internal affairs complaints for abuse of authority, including arresting someone for contempt of cop, which isn't actually a crime. These weren't amateurs stumbling into corruption. These were repeat offenders who'd found a new hunting ground. Time for my counterpunch. I contacted the state's top HOA attorney and arranged a consultation. I documented every enforcement encounter with FBI-grade surveillance equipment. I created a forensic financial analysis showing exactly where HOA funds were disappearing, spreadsheets that would make forensic accountants weep with joy. But most importantly, I was building a case file like I was targeting a criminal enterprise, because that's exactly what this was. My alliance had grown to 8 residents sharing enforcement horror stories. We met weekly, the aroma of fresh coffee mixing with the sweet smell of organized resistance. Sarah brought cookies. Dave brought research. Mrs. Chen brought her legendary note-taking skills. That's when the enforcement division overplayed their hand. I'm walking to my mailbox, apparently a federal crime in Willowbrook, when Tyler approaches with his clipboard and artificial swagger. Sir, I'm citing you for jaywalking within subdivision boundaries. Jaywalking in a residential neighborhood with no sidewalks. Show me the crosswalk, I said, genuinely curious about their creative interpretation of traffic law. HOA regulations supersede municipal traffic laws within community boundaries, Brad announced, reading from a laminated card like he was reciting the Constitution. Beautiful. They were literally inventing laws. I need to see some ID, Tyler demanded, hand hovering over his fake utility belt. This is where FBI training meets suburban theater. These idiots were impersonating law enforcement officers, a felony in all 50 states, but I wanted to see how deep this rabbit hole went. You're private citizens, I replied calmly. I don't have to show you anything. We're certified HOA enforcement officers with full legal authority, Brad declared. That's when Tyler made the call that sealed their fate. He dialed 911 with the dramatic flair of someone reporting a terrorist incident. We need police assistance for a non-compliant resident refusing lawful HOA enforcement. I smiled. They'd just called the real police on an FBI agent for collecting his own mail. While we waited, I made my own call to my FBI colleague in the Civil Rights Division. Hey Mike, remember how you said you were looking for a good Section 1983 case? Boy, do I have a story for you. Neighbors emerged like it was the neighborhood's hottest new reality show. Mrs. Patterson brought her infamous cat. The Johnsons set up folding chairs. Even reclusive Mr. Garcia appeared to witness the carnage. The sound of approaching sirens mixed with nervous chatter as our suburban standoff reached peak absurdity. 2 squad cars arrived. The first officer, someone I didn't recognize, stepped out professionally. The second car, Deputy Sheriff Rick Kensington himself, arriving as backup for his wife's enforcement goons. The conflict of interest was so blatant, it was almost insulting. What seems to be the problem? The first officer asked. Tyler puffed up like a rooster. This resident is refusing to comply with lawful HOA enforcement and provide identification. I waited for the perfect moment, then slowly reached for my wallet. The crowd held its breath as I pulled out my federal credentials and badge. Marcus Donovan, FBI, I said calmly. And these 2 gentlemen just attempted to unlawfully detain a federal agent for collecting his mail. The look on Tyler's face was worth 15 years of government salary. Brad actually took a step backward like my badge might explode. But Rick went pale as fresh snow, realizing his wife's little empire had just declared war on the federal government. Game over, Brenda. The real cops were here now. The badge reveal should have ended this circus. In any rational world, federal credentials would have sent those wannabe cops running back to whatever discount security academy spawned them. But Brenda had officially lost her mind. 3 days later, real police showed up at my door. Brenda had filed a report claiming I'd physically threatened her during our mailbox encounter. Complete fiction, but she'd convinced hubby Rick to take her statement and open an investigation. Rick arrived with Officer Martinez as backup, his hands shaking as he read from his notebook. The poor guy knew he was about to interview an FBI agent based on his wife's revenge fantasy, and the conflict of interest was so obvious it practically had its own zip code. "Mrs. Kensington alleges you made threatening gestures and used intimidating language," Rick announced with all the enthusiasm of someone reading his own death warrant. "Officer Martinez," I said, addressing the real cop, "I assume you're documenting this clear conflict of interest for your report?" Martinez nodded grimly. Smart man could smell the lawsuit brewing. "Deputy Kensington," I continued, pulling out my phone, "did your wife mention I recorded our entire encounter?" I hit play, and Tyler's voice filled my doorway. "We're certified HOA enforcement officers with full legal authority." Rick's face went through more colors than a sunset. The audio was damning. Clear evidence of impersonation, false imprisonment attempts, and violation of civil rights. His wife had just handed me a federal case on a silver platter. "This interview is over," Martinez announced, probably saving Rick's career. "Sir, we'll be filing a report noting the conflicting witness accounts and recommending no charges." But I wasn't done. While Rick was driving away with his tail between his legs, I was making calls. Real calls. FBI calls. "Mike, it's Marcus. That civil rights case I mentioned? It just became a federal investigation. I need you to document everything, the fake enforcement division, the financial fraud, the abuse of process. We're looking at Section 1983 violations, possible RICO charges." The sweet sound of federal bureaucracy kicking into gear filled my kitchen as I explained the systematic pattern of harassment, selective enforcement, and corruption. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every resident Brenda had bullied into submission. 24 hours later, my FBI colleague arrived with a forensic accountant and enough documentation to bury a small city. We spent 6 hours building a case file that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Financial records showing systematic fraud? Check. Audio evidence of civil rights violations? Check. Witness statements from 8 targeted residents? Check and double check. But Brenda's masterstroke was yet to come. The next morning, 6:47 a.m., I'm loading my truck when footsteps crunch across my driveway. 2 new guys in full police-style uniforms, not Tyler and Brad, but actual hired security guards dressed like SWAT officers. The morning dew glistened on their tactical gear as they approached with zip ties and the swagger of people who'd clearly never read the Constitution. "Sir, you're under HOA arrest for unauthorized vehicle modifications," the lead guy announced like he was serving a federal warrant. This was it, the moment Brenda crossed from petty tyrant to federal defendant. These weren't neighborhood kids playing dress-up. These were licensed security guards in police uniforms attempting to detain a federal agent based on HOA violations. The smell of their cheap aftershave mixed with morning coffee as I slowly reached for my credentials, savoring every second of what was about to unfold. "Before we proceed," I said calmly, "you should know I'm Special Agent Marcus Donovan, FBI. The badge caught the morning light like a spotlight, and you've just attempted unlawfully detain a federal officer." The color drained from their faces faster than bathwater. The lead guard actually stumbled backward, dropping his zip ties with a pathetic plastic clatter. "We were just following orders," he stammered, probably calculating how much his bail was going to cost. "Whose orders?" I asked, though we all knew. "Mrs. Kensington said we had full authority." Perfect. Brenda had just provided the final piece of my federal case. As neighbors emerged to witness the spectacle, Mrs. Patterson clutching her cat, the Johnsons bringing coffee like it was dinner theater, I pulled out my phone for the call that would end this once and for all. "Mike, send the team. We've got attempted unlawful detention, impersonation of federal officers, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Brenda Kensington just bought herself a federal indictment." The sound of approaching sirens echoed through our quiet subdivision as real federal agents prepared to show Brenda what actual law enforcement looked like. Her suburban kingdom was about to meet the United States government. Game over. While federal agents were documenting Brenda's latest crime spree, my attorney called with news that changed everything. "Marcus, drop whatever you're doing and get to my office. Now." The smell of fresh coffee and impending justice filled her conference room as she slid a thick document across the polished table. The complete HOA management contract, obtained through public records request. "Page 47, she said with the grin of someone who'd just struck oil. There it was, buried in legal jargon. Willowbrook Compliance Solutions would receive 15% of all fines collected, plus a base management fee of $2,400 monthly. My blood pressure spiked. Brenda wasn't just power tripping, she was running a literal shakedown operation. Every bogus fine, every harassment campaign, every enforcement encounter put cash directly into her pocket. But wait, there's more. Rick's security consulting contract added another $800 monthly, plus hourly rates for special enforcement actions. The conflict of interest was so blatant, it practically had its own billboard. Neither contract had gone through competitive bidding, no board approval, no disclosure of the percentage arrangement. Brenda had hired herself, set her own rates, and apparently nobody bothered reading what they signed. My forensic accountant ran the numbers while I watched her calculator practically catch fire. Previous management company collected maybe $3,000 annually in legitimate fines, parking violations, late landscaping fees, actual rule violations. Under Brenda's regime, $47,000 in 8 months. She'd weaponized enforcement to generate a 1,500% increase in fine revenue. Every dollar collected put $7.50 directly into her personal accounts, plus Rick's consulting fees for providing the muscle. The HOA's reserve funds told the real story. Balance had dropped from $89,000 to $31,000 under Brenda's leadership. Monthly costs increased 340% overnight. $12,000 in emergency repairs with zero documentation, no receipts, no actual work performed. The smoking gun came from the Secretary of State's office. Brenda's business license had expired 14 months ago. She'd been operating an unlicensed company, collecting money under false pretenses, violating state laws governing HOA management. No bonding, no insurance, no legal authority to manage a hot dog stand, much less a homeowners association. Tax records revealed the beautiful finale, significant unreported income that would make IRS investigators weep with joy. This transcends HOA abuse, my attorney said, spreading evidence across the table like playing cards. We're looking at mail fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and potential RICO violations. The scope hit me like a freight train. Every fine notice mailed constituted federal mail fraud. Every electronic payment processed represented wire fraud. The systematic harassment created a racketeering enterprise under federal law. Brenda thought she was running a neighborhood association. She'd actually created a criminal organization that violated more federal statutes than most organized crime families. I called my FBI colleague immediately. Mike, we need to escalate this investigation. We're not looking at civil rights violations, we're looking at organized fraud with federal implications. The excited shuffling of evidence files echoed through the phone as he grasped the magnitude. This wasn't about my truck anymore. This wasn't even about neighborhood harassment. This was about a systematic criminal enterprise that had been masquerading as community management, extracting tens of thousands from residents through fraudulent enforcement schemes. Brenda had built her suburban kingdom on fraud, extortion, and federal crimes. The power dynamic had just shifted completely. She wasn't the untouchable HOA queen anymore. She was a federal defendant who didn't know it yet. And I was about to introduce her to the full weight of the United States government. Game over, Brenda. The real law enforcement was taking over now. Time to build the case that would end Brenda's reign of suburban terror. My attorney connected me with the state's premier HOA litigation firm, specialists who'd made careers dismantling corrupt board members. The smell of expensive leather and legal justice filled their downtown offices as they agreed to take the case pro bono. Civil rights violations with financial fraud? The senior partner grinned. This is our Christmas morning. The state attorney general's office practically salivated when I explained the consumer protection angles. They'd been hunting for a high-profile HOA abuse case to showcase their new enforcement division. My FBI colleague Mike became my unofficial technical advisor, helping navigate federal statutes while maintaining plausible deniability. Can't have active agents investigating their own neighborhoods, but nothing stops private citizens from receiving expert guidance on wire fraud laws. Evidence collection became a community crusade. Our alliance had exploded to 31 affected families, each armed with documentation that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Sarah organized scanning parties, where residents brought violation notices and enforcement horror stories. The highlighter smell and sound of industrial copiers working overtime filled the community center as we built our fortress of evidence. Dave's geographic analysis was pure art, every enforcement action mapped with surgical precision. The pattern screamed selective persecution. Fines clustered around houses with wrong political signs, working-class vehicles, and residents who dared question Queen Brenda's authority. Mrs. Chen produced the crown jewel, over 200 pages of documented encounters, complete with timestamps, witness statements, and photographic evidence. The woman had accidentally created an FBI-quality surveillance file. My contribution? Financial forensics that traced every stolen dollar. Spreadsheets showing the correlation between resident complaints and retaliation fines. Timeline proving systematic abuse designed to generate revenue. But while we were building our case, Brenda was fighting back, badly. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me, apparently hoping to find something that would discredit my testimony. When the PI discovered my FBI background through public records, I imagine that phone call was awkward. Mrs. Kensington, you want me to investigate a federal agent? Are you absolutely sure about this? Brenda's response was a 3-day document shredding marathon. The grinding noise from her home office sounded like a wood chipper convention as she destroyed evidence faster than a mob accountant facing indictment. Meanwhile, she was spreading neighborhood rumors about me being a dangerous federal agent under investigation. Anonymous flyers appeared warning residents about federal surveillance and claiming I was targeting innocent families. The desperation was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Rick tried distancing himself from the HOA mess, suddenly claiming his $800 monthly security consulting was unpaid volunteer work. Amazing how money becomes charity when federal investigators start sniffing around. Our war room operated from the community center every Tuesday evening, the aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the sweet smell of impending justice as residents refined their testimony. Transportation arranged for elderly witnesses. Volunteer coordination for crowd management during what promised to be the most dramatic HOA meeting in suburban history. Jennifer Walsh, our investigative reporter ally, spent days fact-checking our evidence mountain. In 20 years of journalism, she said, shaking her head, I've never seen corruption this blatant or this poorly hidden. Social media warfare escalated daily. Hashtag fake HOA police trending locally. Ring doorbell footage of enforcement encounters going viral. Brenda's supporters dwindling to her 2 nephews and whoever was cashing her checks. Technical preparation turned military precise. Sound system tested for optimal courtroom-style acoustics. Overflow viewing arranged for anticipated crowds. Live streaming capability for remote witnesses. Evidence boards designed for maximum visual impact. I arranged for Mike to attend as a concerned citizen, ensuring federal eyes on the proceedings. Attorney General representative confirmed attendance. Local police chief briefed to prevent jurisdictional confusion when the real arrests began. Media coordination locked down live coverage from 3 television stations, 2 newspapers, and Jennifer's documentary crew. Brenda's public execution would be broadcast for posterity. The cease and desist letter for the Enforcement Division was crafted with surgical precision, citing specific federal statutes and warning of personal liability for continued impersonation activities. Tyler and Brad would receive copies via certified mail, creating federal evidence trail of notice. Parliamentary procedure became surprisingly critical. Residents practiced board removal processes, ensuring legal compliance during Brenda's inevitable political execution. Every rule followed perfectly. We weren't giving her any procedural escape routes. As D-Day approached, printer ink smell filled dozens of homes as residents prepared evidence packets. The clicking of staplers echoed through the subdivision like typewriter keys writing Brenda's political obituary. Brenda's suburban empire was about to face federal law, state consumer protection, investigative journalism, and very angry residents armed with actual facts. The countdown to justice had officially begun, and Brenda was about to learn what happens when amateur criminals pick fights with professional investigators. Brenda's response to organized resistance? Full-scale psychological warfare. She tried canceling the special meeting by claiming security threats from militant residents. The certified letter reeked of desperation and cheap legal advice, citing federal intimidation tactics and potential violence. Rich, considering she'd been running fake police for months. When the board voted to proceed anyway, she hired legitimate security guards to maintain order, real guards to protect her from consequences of fake guards. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. But Brenda's true masterpiece was the overnight propaganda blitz. Anonymous flyers appeared on doorsteps warning about dangerous federal surveillance and claiming I was under FBI investigation for abuse of authority. The paper smelled like desperation and discount printing as neighbors found these fiction novels masquerading as community notices. Phone calls started hitting elderly residents, warning them to stay away from the dangerous meeting where federal agents might arrest innocent people. The woman was literally running a disinformation campaign against an FBI agent investigating her crimes. Then came the sabotage. 2 nights before the meeting, my mailbox was vandalized. Crowbar marks on the post, lock mechanism destroyed, contents scattered across my lawn. The smell of fresh metal shavings mixed with morning dew as I photographed the damage for evidence. Anonymous calls flooded our resistance group members. Sarah got warned about federal surveillance of her children. Dave was told his involvement with a rogue agent could affect his city job. Mrs. Chen received threats about immigration consequences, despite being a naturalized citizen for 30 years. While Brenda was playing amateur spy games, I was coordinating with actual law enforcement. Police Chief Rodriguez personally reviewed the intimidation evidence, his face darkening with each report. "This stops now," he declared, assigning patrol cars to drive by targeted residents' homes. Deputy Kensington's involvement makes this a departmental integrity issue. The FBI Civil Rights Division opened a preliminary investigation based on the systematic harassment patterns. Mike arrived with a forensic accountant and digital evidence specialist, officially documenting federal interest in the case. Attorney General's office deployed their consumer protection chief armed with subpoena power and prosecutorial authority. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a state-level criminal investigation. But Brenda's crowning achievement of stupidity came 3 days before the meeting. She approached me in the grocery store parking lot, glancing around like a drug dealer conducting business. The chemical assault of her perfume mixed with nervous perspiration as she made what she probably thought was a sophisticated offer. "Marcus, we can resolve this privately," she whispered, actually looking over her shoulder. "I'll waive all your fines, and we forget this misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. She called systematic fraud and fake police a misunderstanding. "What about the other residents?" I asked, activating the recording app I'd prepared for exactly this moment. "Rick can make problems disappear," she said with a conspiratorial wink. "Traffic tickets, permit issues, inspection delays. We take care of people who take care of us." Beautiful. She'd just confessed to bribery, conspiracy, and abuse of official authority while standing next to the frozen food section. The corruption was so blatant it practically had its own shopping cart. The recording was FBI quality clear. Every word of bribery, witness intimidation, and abuse of power documented for posterity. Mike nearly choked on his coffee when I played it back. "She actually said, 'make problems disappear in a grocery store'?" he gasped. "Does she think she's auditioning for a mob movie?" Community response to the intimidation campaign was swift and magnificent. Meeting attendance projections exploded to over 400 residents. The high school auditorium was reserved for overflow. Local businesses donated snacks because suburban revolution apparently requires refreshments. Carpools organized for elderly residents too scared to drive alone. Live streaming arranged for people afraid to attend in person. Security volunteers coordinated with real police to ensure safety. Mrs. Chen prepared her masterpiece, the complete chronicle of Brenda's crimes, 47 pages of documented abuse that read like a federal indictment. Sarah organized evidence packets for media distribution. Dave created visual presentations that would make prosecutors weep with joy. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Neighbors whispered in grocery aisles. Supportive notes appeared in mailboxes. Even the postal worker asked if I needed extra security for mail delivery. Brenda's final desperate gambit was scheduling a competing emergency dissolution meeting for the same evening, hoping to legally disband the HOA before residents could remove her. Only 12 households received notice, her remaining allies. But court injunctions are beautiful when you have competent legal representation. Our attorney secured a restraining order preventing any asset distribution or organizational changes. As Judgment Day approached, Brenda was trapped in a legal cage of her own construction, facing federal investigation, state charges, and 400 furious neighbors armed with evidence. The sound of her empire crumbling was pure music. With 24 hours until Judgment Day, Brenda made her final desperate play, attempting to steal everything and run. She called an emergency dissolution meeting for 2 p.m., the same day as our community showdown. Only 12 residents received notice: Tyler, Brad, and whatever allies were still cashing her checks. The plan was breathtakingly simple. Dissolve the HOA, distribute remaining funds to board members for administrative costs, and disappear before anyone could stop her. $60,000. That's what she thought her freedom was worth. Rick arranged police protection for the dissolution meeting, despite the obvious conflict of interest. His department would provide security while his wife looted the community treasury. The corruption was so blatant it practically had its own billboard. But Brenda's smear campaign reached peak insanity. Anonymous social media accounts flooded neighborhood Facebook groups with warnings about federal surveillance operations and harassment of innocent families. The posts had all the sophistication of middle school rumors, but scared residents nonetheless. Someone spray-painted "Federal Snitch" on the community center wall where our meeting would be held. The smell of fresh paint and criminal desperation hung in the morning air as volunteers scrubbed away Brenda's latest tantrum. Then came the frame job. 3 sprinkler heads in the common area were mysteriously destroyed overnight, with evidence pointing to my truck's tire tracks. Anonymous tips flooded the police claiming witnesses saw me vandalizing community property. The setup was so obvious it practically had training wheels, but Rick opened an investigation anyway. While Brenda played amateur criminal, I was orchestrating a federal response that would become legend in law enforcement textbooks. I'd secured court injunctions freezing all HOA assets pending investigation. Every bank account, every wire transfer, every check, locked down tighter than federal prison. FBI surveillance teams positioned throughout the neighborhood as concerned residents. Mike brought a communications van disguised as cable repair, complete with recording equipment that would capture every word of Brenda's criminal conspiracy. The Attorney General's office prepared arrest warrants for the moment anyone attempted unauthorized asset distribution. Consumer protection doesn't mess around when corrupt officials try stealing from homeowners. But the real trap was technological. Federal banking authorities had flagged all HOA accounts for suspicious activity monitoring. Any attempt to transfer funds would trigger immediate alerts and automatic freezes. My private investigator contact provided the smoking gun. Brenda had opened offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, preparing to flee the country with stolen HOA funds. Bank routing information, account numbers, transfer schedules. She'd planned her escape down to the last detail. The woman thought she was playing checkers against suburban amateurs. She had no idea she was actually playing chess against federal law enforcement. Community preparation reached military precision. 450 residents confirmed attendance for our 7 p.m. confrontation. Overflow seating arranged at 3 locations with live feeds. 7 news organizations credentialed to document Brenda's public destruction. Mrs. Chen organized witness testimony with surgical efficiency. 37 residents prepared statements about systematic harassment, fraudulent fines, and civil rights violations. Each account documented, notarized, and ready for prime time. Sarah coordinated evidence packets containing financial analysis, legal violations, and photographic proof. Dave prepared visual presentations that would make the corruption undeniable even to Brenda's mother. The sound of printers working overtime filled dozens of homes as residents prepared documentation. Highlighter smell mixed with anticipation as final evidence reviews happened in kitchens across the subdivision. At 2 p.m., Brenda's illegal dissolution meeting convened in the community center back room. FBI surveillance captured every word as she attempted to commit felony theft in broad daylight. "We need to distribute remaining funds immediately," she announced to her 12 co-conspirators, apparently unaware that federal agents were documenting her confession through the walls. The nervous shuffling of papers mixed with whispered concerns as her allies realized they were witnessing multiple felonies. Even Tyler looked uncomfortable as Brenda outlined plans to wire $60,000 to personal accounts. "What about the other residents?" someone asked nervously. "They'll be too busy fighting the dissolution to stop us," Brenda replied, with the confidence of someone who'd never dealt with actual law enforcement. Rick provided security by guarding the door, photographed by FBI surveillance teams documenting his participation in the conspiracy. His law enforcement career was ending in real time, and he didn't even know it. But when Brenda attempted the wire transfers, court-ordered account freezes triggered immediately. Bank security contacted federal authorities as automated systems blocked every transaction. The trap was set. Evidence collected. Federal agents positioned. Media assembled. As evening approached, 450 residents gathered in the community center for what promised to be the most dramatic HOA meeting in suburban history. Brenda and Rick were about to discover what happens when amateur criminals declare war on professional law enforcement. The public execution was about to begin. The community center had never seen anything like this circus of suburban justice. 450 residents packed every available space, with overflow crowds watching live feeds from 3 locations. the smell of nervous perspiration mixed with fresh coffee and anticipation, as our quiet subdivision became the epicenter of local news coverage. Television cameras lined the walls like electronic firing squad, their red recording lights casting an ominous glow over what promised to be the most dramatic HOA meeting in suburban history. Jennifer Walsh and her investigative team claimed front row seats, practically salivating over their Pulitzer Prize-worthy story. State Representative Martinez opened with the gravity of someone addressing a congressional hearing. What happened in Willowbrook represents systematic corruption that threatens every homeowner in our state. The thunderous applause made the building shake, but I could see Brenda huddled in the back corner with Tyler, Brad, and Rick, looking like defendants at their own trial. Her trademark clipboard was notably absent, probably because federal agents had seized it as evidence. When my moment arrived, I approached the podium carrying 3 thick binders that represented months of federal quality investigation. The crowd fell silent except for camera shutters and the collective holding of breath. "Neighbors," I began, opening the first binder with theatrical precision. "What I'm about to show you isn't just HOA abuse. This is a criminal enterprise that would make organized crime families proud." I displayed the financial flowchart showing how every bogus fine fed Brenda's bank account. The collective gasp echoed through the room like a physical force as residents realized the scope of systematic theft. 15% of every fine went directly to Brenda's pocket, I announced, watching her face turn pale. She didn't increase enforcement for safety. She did it for profit. Then I revealed Rick's consulting fees, the fake police uniforms, and the intimidation campaigns. But the real bombshell was playing the grocery store recording. Brenda's voice filled the room through crystal-clear speakers. "Rick can make problems disappear, traffic tickets, permit issues, inspection delays. We take care of people who take care of us." The community center erupted like a volcano. Residents shouted demands for justice, called for immediate arrests, and several elderly ladies used language that would make sailors blush. Mrs. Patterson's cat actually hissed, probably sensing the collective rage. That's when FBI Special Agent Mike Torres stood up from the audience, badge gleaming under fluorescent lights. "Ladies and gentlemen, based on evidence presented and our federal investigation, criminal charges are being filed against both Kensingtons for conspiracy, wire fraud, civil rights violations, and operating a criminal enterprise." The validation hit like a lightning bolt. An actual FBI agent confirming that our suburban nightmare was a legitimate federal crime. The applause was deafening. Cheers, whistles, and the sweet sound of vindication. But Brenda wasn't finished destroying herself. She shoved through the crowd like a woman possessed, grabbing the microphone with desperate claws. "This is a federal witch hunt," she screamed, voice cracking with hysteria. "Marcus Donovan is a rogue agent abusing government power for personal revenge." The room fell dead silent, 450 people waiting for my response. I stood slowly, pulled out my federal credentials, and held them high enough for every camera to capture. The moment stretched like taffy as anticipation built to a crescendo. "Brenda," I said with the calm confidence of someone who'd spent 15 years dismantling criminal organizations, "I'm not a rogue agent." I paused for maximum impact, letting the silence build. "I'm just an FBI agent who's really, really good at his job. And you just got caught by someone who makes a living destroying people exactly like you." The community center exploded with the force of pent-up suburban rage finally finding release. Standing ovation, cheering, applause that rattled windows, and the most satisfying sound in the world, Brenda's complete and utter public humiliation. Even the hardened news crews were grinning as they captured her meltdown for the evening broadcast. Camera flashes popped like fireworks as residents documented the moment justice came to Willowbrook Estates. Attorney General Representative Sarah Chen announced state charges would be filed within 48 hours. This represents the largest HOA fraud prosecution in state history. The formal votes were pure theater. Brenda's removal passed 447 to 3. Even her mother-in-law voted against her. The motion to sue for asset recovery was unanimous except for abstentions from co-conspirators. Federal agents served arrest warrants right there on stage, handcuffs clicking over wrists as cameras captured every angle. Tyler and Brad were led away in confusion, probably wondering how playing dress-up cop had led to federal charges. As residents lined up to share their stories and thank me personally, the smell of victory mixed with evening air streaming through open doors. Mrs. Chen approached with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Patterson hugged me with surprising strength, and even grumpy Mr. Garcia shook my hand. The sound of justice being served echoed through our subdivision as federal vehicles carried away the criminals who'd terrorized our community. Game over, Brenda. The real law enforcement had finally arrived. 6 months later, justice tasted sweeter than Mrs. Chen's victory cookies. Brenda pleaded guilty to federal mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges rather than face a jury trial that would have been broadcast nationwide. 18 months in federal prison, plus full restitution of $67,000 recovered from her offshore accounts. Her management license was permanently revoked and she's banned from any HOA involvement for life. Rick lost his deputy position and faced separate state charges for abuse of authority. His law enforcement career ended with all the dignity of a garbage fire, and his pension was frozen pending civil restitution. Tyler and Brad received probation and community service for impersonating officers, plus lifetime bans from security work. Last I heard, they're selling mattresses, which seems fitting for people who spent months living in fantasy land. But the real victory was our community's transformation. The new board, elected unanimously, slashed monthly fees to $25, enough for actual maintenance without funding criminal enterprises. We hired a legitimate management company through proper competitive bidding, complete with bonding, insurance, and transparent financial reporting that would make accountants weep with joy. Resident satisfaction surveys showed 94% approval ratings, a complete reversal from Brenda's reign of terror. Property values jumped 12% as word spread about our corruption-free neighborhood. Turns out buyers prefer communities where fake police don't arrest people for collecting mail. The crown jewel was our Willowbrook Transparency Foundation, established with recovered funds to help other communities fight HOA abuse. We've assisted 23 neighborhoods in identifying and prosecuting corrupt officials, creating a network of suburban justice that spans 3 states. Our case inspired legislation in 5 states requiring competitive bidding for HOA contracts and prohibiting percentage-based enforcement fees. I testified before state legislatures helping pass the Homeowner Protection Act that strengthened resident rights nationwide. The National HOA Association adopted anti-corruption guidelines based on our template, and my story became required reading in community management certification programs. Apparently, our suburban drama is now taught in graduate courses about municipal governance. Personal healing came through unexpected purpose. Elected unanimously to our HOA board, I discovered that FBI financial crime skills transfer beautifully to reviewing landscaping contracts and ensuring fiscal transparency. Who knew federal investigation experience would make me the neighborhood's go-to guy for budget analysis? The template documents we created, evidence checklists, organizing guides, legal resources, have been downloaded over 75,000 times through consumer protection agencies. Mrs. Chen's legendary documentation system became the gold standard for fighting HOA abuse. Our annual Justice Day celebration draws nearly 1,000 people, complete with barbecue, live music, and ceremonial shredding of old violation notices. The aroma of grilled burgers mixing with the sound of children's laughter has replaced the tension that once defined our community. The Scholarship Fund helps local students studying law and public administration because the next generation needs to understand how ordinary citizens can defeat systematic corruption through knowledge, determination, and proper evidence collection. National attention brought unexpected benefits, featured on investigative programs, community organizing documentaries, and even a Lifetime movie that somehow made Brenda's character less villainous than reality. 6 FBI field offices have requested our investigation template for similar cases in their jurisdictions. But the most satisfying moment came last week when my neighbor Sarah approached during our morning walk. Marcus, 3 other subdivisions in the county are dealing with corrupt boards. They're asking if the Willowbrook FBI guy can help them organize resistance. That's when I realized this wasn't about one neighborhood or one criminal. This was about empowering communities everywhere to stand up to petty tyrants who think homeowner associations are personal kingdoms. My phone now rings weekly with requests from residents facing similar situations. Apparently, suburban corruption is an epidemic, and our success story has become the template for fighting back. The smell of fresh coffee and Saturday morning peace now fills our neighborhood instead of tension and fear. Children play in streets where enforcement officers once prowled. Neighbors chat over fences without worrying about violation notices. Drop your HOA horror stories in the comments. Let's build a database that helps other communities recognize and fight systematic abuse before it reaches criminal levels. Subscribe for more justice-served content because there's apparently no shortage of HOA tyrants who need to meet federal law enforcement. Remember, knowledge is power. Documentation wins cases, and organized communities can defeat any corrupt official stupid enough to pick fights with people who know their rights. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about building better communities where good people can live in peace.